says off. Okay, yeah, now it says
Yeah,
live.
yeah. Now we're actually we were broadcasting through Pensacola, Florida, and now we're broadcasting through Binghamton, New York. Isn't it amazing the technology, the way it works these days? And so let me just make sure though that my settings are that looks correct. Okay, yeah. Well, anyway, so we were talking about just before when we got knocked off. So, what are the implications we see for the Grace Report? What do we think is going to come of this for both Bob Jones University former students and the future of the college with students? What
That's
do you think?
definitely the big question right now. It's hard to predict exactly what will happen. I think that Bob Jones will distance, and they actually have already started to distance themselves from Dr. Wood, from Bob Jones III, the people that were specifically named. I wouldn't be surprised if Jim Berg was on the outs too, just based on. I think they'll probably follow through on that. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a name change at the school, just because there's no Joneses working there anymore in any kind of high level position.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Where's Steve Jones these days? I know he stepped down, but is he in any capacity there?
Not at the school that I know of, no.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Technically, he's on medical leave. I think.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I gotta be honest with you. When he was going through that those issues, I just had this nagging feeling that he was having real problems with that paradigm, that he wasn't really on board, and yet I think he didn't know how to deal with it. That's the impression I got. I don't know if anyone else had that impression, but it's like, I think you guys are wrong, but here I
Yeah,
am.
I kind of feel for him in some ways. Having that legacy, and then I think probably being in that position probably changes you too.
Yeah.
I
Right.
My personal opinion is that I think there's things he could have done, but he didn't. I mean, you're the president of the school,
Right.
but I see the school doing whatever they can that's visible and doesn't take a lot of you know not necessarily a lot of effort, but things that they can point. They're able to point to and say, "Hey, look, yeah, see, we're doing it." And
Yeah.
then some of the other stuff maybe not so much. Like a name change, I think, is a very visible way of saying that they're breaking away from that old mentality. Um, will they stop selling the materials, or distance themselves, or put out a retraction? I don't know. It's
Yeah. Now there's two Steve Pettits, which kind of confuses some people. There's a Steve Pettit from Florida, who's a different Steve Pettit, who's deals with what's the name of that? Christ in you. I forget the
Yeah, I know what you're talking. Yeah, but that's a completely different
yeah.
one.
Well, oddly enough, about a month ago, both Steve Pettits were here in town. One was at the Heritage Club with a promotional for Bob Jones University, and the other one was up here having a Bible study as a guest in a church. And so both Steve Pettits were here.
I think it's interesting because the apology that Steve Pettit read, I don't know, probably he didn't write it. It seemed very legally composed, but there are problems with it. But it also, I think, was one of the strongest statements I've ever seen. I would never imagine Bob Jones III issuing a statement like he did, where he actually said we failed to uphold, and went on from there. He did do some apology. We're sorry you felt this way, but there were other statements that were actually very strong. So it's interesting to see what he's doing or what he will do. Um, Especially too, like Clinton said, there are no Joneses in control of the university anymore on the board. Or Randy Page has said that Bob Jones III is still chancellor. Yet if you go to the website and look in the president's cabinet, Bob Wood's name is no longer there, and Bob Jones III's name is no longer listed there. So those two people have been removed, but there's still a listing for a crisis counseling graduate level class being taught by Jim Berg next semester. So it's like they've done some things, but they haven't gone through and done everything yet.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that somebody had edited the Wikipedia page on Dr. Bob Jones III, and then it reverted. back to previous. It was somebody complaining that this is not a news site.
Yeah, that's if you look through the records of Wikipedia, you'll find that person is changing things almost within the time that they get edited. That's a whole. You could spend 3 shows talking about that.
Which is a shame because it, I certainly don't think that we want to use Wikipedia as a way of airing the laundry of our grievances, and even if they're legitimate, that's not the. It is an attempt at making an encyclopedia. However, some of these people are people of note, and some of the historical events that take place are put things into perspective and are really a part of what ought to be there. And I think will eventually work its way there, and there is actually an appeal process that can be done on Wikipedia to prevent people from trying to keep something totally squeaky clean when it really isn't. Uh, I'm just curious, what do you think the future of students will, if they don't have a name change? What will students do?
I think they'll continue. Their enrollment has been dropping for a number of years, 5 years at least. I think it'll continue to decline. I don't know how much of it. I'm not optimistic that this will have a huge impact. That's just my personal opinion because I think the echo chamber of the news that people hear within this fundamentalist world, I think it's very, very strong. So how much of that filters down to high school kids trying to pick what college to go to. I think the other factors that have made the enrollment decline, however, will continue to affect it. Money, the lack of accreditation, practical things like that.
Yeah, I think they're kind of in a bind because no matter going to keep going on, they separate themselves from these big 3 people. They're alienating, what they're alienating a base that's already shrinking for them.
Right.
If they open themselves up to people who are not normally their customers, they're alienating the other base anyway. And I don't know that if they do things that would open them up to people who are a little more less rigid in their standards. What can Bob Jones sell to them that they can't get at Cedarville or Liberty or some of these other regionally accredited institutions? So I think they're stuck.
If they water down the brand, what do they have to offer people?
Right, exactly. And there's really nothing.
With Steve Pettit also now there, chances are that this is an opportunity for it to still have a future as an organization, because think about it, if it was still Jones' operation, that would make the transition at this point in time very difficult, and also look suspect. Whereas now this thing's already begun and it's already in motion, and Steve Pettit has been there for a while now, and so as he moves things forward, he's actually fortunately in a position where he can say, we failed you, even though he wasn't a part of that we at the time of most of these failings.
Well, and I think one thing that I've seen some victims talk about is, it's fine that Pettit has said something, but we haven't heard from the big 3, much less some of the others that we know are described in the report if they're not named specifically. And I think that's something that they'll definitely have to think about doing.
I think the school was definitely looking ahead this spring when it picked its new president. I think they were definitely foreseeing this bombshell and saying we need to, find someone who's somewhat outside of our little camp.
Right.
Of course, on a spectrum, he's still very much a part of what they do, but he's not a Jones, that's for sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And if they don't follow through with those recommendations, they're going to have to come up with a very good reason, because there are a lot of people paying attention to what they're doing. Firing Grace a year ago made sure that there was going to be a lot of people watching what they do when the report came out.
Yes, they fired Grace and then rehired them after a great deal of hubbub, people really complaining about that.
My personal opinion is that was a way to delay what they needed to do for something, which was probably get a new president installed that wasn't a Jones.
Wow. Yeah, well, I think that they'll probably have somewhat of a future, but what you were saying before is true. That what do they have to offer now that is somehow unique? And of course that was one of their little verbal logos was uniqueness.
Well, and that's one of the things that Pettit was quoted, I think, at the end of last semester. McClinton, you might remember this or remember it better than I, but he talked about specifically that going to school there was about the experience, not necessarily the academics, which I think is a funny thing to say about school. But
A college,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
the university, yeah. Well, who knows what'll come of it all? But I hope well I hope that it'll help them to move forward, maybe even a radically different direction. Sometimes you think an organization can't change radically, but if you're familiar with the Worldwide Church of God, that's an organization that went from being something that was really considered in mainstream circles as a cult to becoming more of a mainstream evangelical organization. That surprised me when they did that. As son as was it Henry W. Armstrong or whatever. When things changed, many of the other pastors came forward, and they managed to push the organization through to a point where they no longer even allow published some of their earlier works. They won't, and there's some groups that broke off from them because they didn't like the changes. Herbert W. Armstrong, they didn't like the changes, and they wanted to continue using the old literature, and they were actually forbidden by copyright to do so. So, I mean, it's true that sometimes an organization can change radically, but at the same time, it may be we're entering into a new era socially anyway. I was reading an article today about how there was a time we were talking about the nuns. People have no affiliation, but now we're talking about the duns. There's people who, even if their faith hasn't changed, their belief system hasn't changed, they've just quit church. They're not interested. They're not going. They're not part of these organizations anymore. They're just believers.
Hmm.
And I get the impression that this is going to be a real part of it. And anyway, so we have James Washburn coming in because we're going to be starting at the top of the hour actually another show. And Bill, you're welcome to stay with us as well as you, Clinton, as we do this. But typically, coming up on the hour at 8 o'clock Central, we begin another show called The Place. And so we have James Washburn, author, to join us at that point in time. But anyhow, so as we finish out this hour, it seems to me that this could be really, it's the possibility this could be the actual end of the school. That's a possibility.
It is one possibility, sure. And I think a very important piece of that is what might happen in the coming days. There's a Greenville solicitor who wants to look into another investigation of the school by the government to say were there violations of mandatory reporting laws. We don't know what will happen there, but
right, or obstruction of justice.
Right. This could involve either criminal behavior or actually a revocation of 501c3 status.
I mean, they've already lost that. They lost that when the Supreme Court case back in the 80s when I was a student.
Oh, and they never got it restored?
They never got it restored, which actually
was really a big poke in the eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the solicitor is looking at the mandatory reporting law violations as well as if obstruction of justice took place in telling some of these victims not to say anything or not to report what had happened. But that'll be an interesting.
Well, this is certainly unique, then, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's although the plus points, there's no accreditation of any real sort.
Well, they do have a national. They have a national accreditation, which makes them eligible for receiving federal financial student loans. So there's, this impacts that as well. So there may be any number of federal agencies that may want to look into things based on what's been found in this report. I do have to excuse myself. I have to take care of some other things, so I won't be in on the next hour.
Okay, well, thanks, Bill. I appreciate your, because I was only there for 3 semesters, it wasn't that huge a part of my life, and so I haven't always been following on top of this is the way some of the other BJU students were, and the BJU survivors. But I want to thank you both, Bill and Clinton, for um, joining me and chatting with me about this Grace report, which was astounding. And so thanks a lot. And
You're welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very good. Yeah. Well, and we also have, I'm hoping that Dr. Jones will be with us soon here, and he'll talk to us. And James, is that actually your first name, or was I was?
Yes, that's my legal first name. I usually go by Pep. P-E-P.
That's what, yeah, because I saw Pep, and I'm thinking, so where's Pepin? What did you do with him?
Well, I guess I was pretty hyperactive. I guess my grandma gave it to me after I destroyed her home.
Lots of Pep.
Small kid, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to this coming hour. We're actually still live and broadcasting, but we'll split the shows later. I think is the way we're gonna do it, because we had to stop in the middle of my show for some reason. There was a connection problem from Florida, and now we're broadcasting through Binghamton. So you see, that's the technology.
Oh, wow, amazing! I told Dr. Jones that it's probably an alien invasion, a landing someplace in the southeast.
Well, you never know. Yeah. Now, we were also going to talk about a recent publication of yours, and let's see if I think I have. Let me see if I can grab that here. I've got it in my iPad here.
Yes.
Your touching spirit, the letters of.
Give it a try.
Menomonie Kay.
As I mentioned this morning with Rhonda, no one's gotten it right the first time. It's in the Anishinaabe language. There's not a lot of long vowels, and so at least from the extent of the knowledge that I have about the language, which isn't much, but it's pronounced touching spirit, the letters of Menomonie Kay. Menomonie Kay, yes.
No, yeah,
Menomonie Kay. Or you could say Menomonie Kay. That's close enough.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you if you put that into a title, that can either hurt or help a lot, because people are not going to forget about what is that? Menomonie Kay. Right. Yeah. Well, as we're going to take a look at this, let's see. I got that. This is when did this get published?
September. Middle of September. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Basically, just released. We had a Facebook launch about 10 days ago or so, and that had a very good response. And gave away a lot of books.
Yeah. And isn't it that way? Is this your first publication?
It is. It's the first one, yes. I actually began to write it as a catharsis. And then as things developed and other people started reading it, they kind of encouraged me, and just one thing led to another, and eventually I was picked up by an agent, and who was, taken by the message, and so that's the history. Yeah. I went through actually a series of 4 different publisher contracts before this last one.
Really?
Either bankruptcies or internal wranglings or illnesses within the companies, and prevented the other ones.
Didn't destroy it. I'm a musician, as you can probably tell from the guitars behind me. I'm actually broadcasting from a recording studio. And unfortunately, in the music business, there's sometimes musicians who sign contracts, and then the people they've signed the contracts with, they go under, but they take the agreements with them. A casual friend of mine is Joey Mullen from Badfinger, and Badfinger had 2 albums that were, where they recorded the albums, and of course the songs then have to be copyright protected. They have to be
Yes.
assigned to a publisher, and then the publishing rights no longer belong to the band, and these deals finally fell through. Because the albums were never made public, even Badfinger doesn't have the right to record them.
That's a shame.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that happened with them with 2 albums. So I'm glad that this thing didn't get buried in the mix-ups. Yeah.
Right. And all of the publishers that we were working with in the past, the 3 previous ones, were very very above board and kind enough, pleasant enough to work with. So.
Yeah. So anyway, so in brief, what's it all about?
Well, yes, Touching Spirit, the Letters of Menomonie Kay. It is a story of... Should I continue?
Oh, yes, yeah. We just had Daryl has joined us. But Daryl, you can mute your mic for just a moment there. Yeah, so continue on.
Yeah, it's a story, takes place, initiated in 1928 and runs through the 30s, about a white boy who loses his parents in a drowning accident in northern Manitoba. And he is taken into the home of a childless couple, a native First Nations couple of Canada. And his great-grandfather, a native man, writes him a series of letters about the things that he's learned in his life. It's spiritual truth he has come to embrace. This young boy reads these letters at the age of 14 before he goes off to school in the South. They don't make a lot of sense to him at that age. 30 years later, he returns to the North after his adoptive father's death, rediscovers the letters, and then rereads them. His worldview is challenged, and he responds within the book to these letters as he's reading them and the reactions that he is feeling inside. And so the reader is invited to follow along on this journey. And hopefully my intents are to open the heart of the reader, not to appeal so much to the brain, to the mind, but to open one's heart, because I believe that much, especially in Christianity today, is in conflict with our hearts. But many people will ignore that, thinking that they have to pay attention to what's been dumped or indoctrinated into their minds, and they have to quiet their heart. Mm-hmm. And yet, what I have found is that whenever I have that conflict, it's been my heart that's been right, and that there are alternative views to the data that's up here that are much more fitting for my heart.
Do you find that that this is changing? However, that as time goes on, that we're getting more and more people who are really ready to. Some people are jumping ship altogether. Others are just saying, "Oh, wait a minute, we're going to rearrange some of this." I mean, after all, who's your audience for the book?
My audience is the unchurched, the unchristianized. Yet I wrote it with a intent. I have woven in enough paraphrase of scriptural ideas that anyone who is biblically literate will pick up on this. They'll catch those things, and I hope we'll draw them along, keep them coming in the book, so that I can offer them the permission to listen to their heart. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I believe you're absolutely correct. It is snowballing. More and more people that I am associating with are coming to these understandings on their own, more of an inclusivist viewpoint.
Yes, and we've been joined actually by Nate Cunningham and also by Daryl, who's often with us because he's got a lot of interesting, wonderful, fun things to say. Daryl Farrell. And so, Nate, have you seen anything about this particular book yet?
No, I'm in the dark, and I just saw you guys were hanging out, so I thought I'd jump in and say hi for a minute.
Yeah, well, that's the way we are here. We're kind of informal with some of our long-lasting friends. Yeah, we're talking with Pep Washburn, who's written a book which is Letters. Let me say this. See if I can do this again. I'm going to look at the title here again. Touching Spirit: The Letters of Menomonie Kay. Did
Very
I get
good.
that right?
You got it.
Yeah, and which is kind of taking people on through a journey. And of course, this journey is not intended to kind of force them anywhere, but rather to invite them
Yes.
and to move along. And of course, which is something which that's right up Nate's alley as well, right?
Yeah, can you recap that? Sorry, I just sat down. I'm having all kinds of stuff happening right now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that the idea there of writing something with the notion of kind of inviting people to think and consider rather than to try to dogmatically push an idea upon them, but rather kind of enable their discovery. That's something that you've certainly been
Yeah,
doing. I get the impression.
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think if you can make your presentation and present what you want people to absorb, and they can think about it. You're not trying to shove it dogmatically down their throat right then. Then my hope is that they'll walk away and be able to take a breath and really consider and think about these things instead of just immediately dismiss it because it's being force fed to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Pep, I'm curious. Where is this book currently available?
You can get it online at Amazon or at Barnes & Noble. And just type in Touching Spirit, the Letters of Menomonie Kay. And if you don't get Menomonie Kay right, just Touching Spirit, the letters, and you'll see it. It'll pop up there with some other books of a similar title.
Is it available as hardcover or softcover or as Kindle?
It's available in all formats: hardcover, softcover, Kindle, ebook. Kindle requires a 60 or 90-day exclusive right, and then it'll be available on Nook and other things as well. And if I may put in a little plug, I have a site that if anyone's interested in reading more detail and excerpts from the book, my website is theteacherwithin.com. And at that site, they can really get some in-depth understanding of this fictional work. It is fiction,
right,
but it's sort of a historical fiction because there are real characters in it that lived in this small community in northern Manitoba.
Now, could you give us just a taste of some of the issues that are faced that precipitates these letters?
The young man, well, at this point now in his mid-40s, who has gone back north to bury his adopted father, as I said, rediscovers this box of letters in the loft, and 30 years of dust have covered them. And he opens them up, and he is struck by the unconditional love that is voiced in the letters, this unconditional acceptance of Gitche Manitou, the Great Spirit, the Great Mystery, God, because he has been raised, not raised, but when he left the home, he went south and went to seminary. So into his mind was dumped exclusivity, that, if you're not part of this group, you're not part of the in-group. And so it begins to challenge his exclusive indoctrination. It also begins to rekindle in him an anticipation for every day of meeting, if you will, God afresh each morning and seeing what is there that you have for me today. I don't want to be closed up as to what's out there. I cannot put you in a box. So you see his responses to these letters, and the letters are written in the vernacular of the grandfather, the great-grandfather. Mm-hmm. So when you read them, and I am not a literary genius, and so I actually chose that method because I figured, well, when someone reads these letters and the grammar is not correct, I'll be okay. They'll just attribute it to the old man, you see.
Right, yeah, there you go. That works, and plus it helps us to get past some of that if people are going to pick on that, and really just go for the content. Yeah. So, but and then in terms of, are there any like really turnarounds or say resolutions or arrivals at conundrums or things like that that you could give us a taste of in the book?
Are you asking me to read something, or?
Well, you could do that if you liked, but just we want people to, of course, read the book. We don't want to recite it all here, but we do. But if there was something that to kind of give them a sense of one of the particular incidents that happens, and
well, he spends, this reader, this man in his mid-40s now, back at his childhood cabin. He spends a couple days reading these letters and muses over their contents, and he heads back south to his career in church, in the religious realm. And yet there's a gnawing on his mind, and he begins to speak to his congregation about this, and this gets him in hot water because he's becoming less and less exclusive and more inclusive. Eventually, as the book progresses, he's approached by a dear friend who's also in the ministry, and he's told, the higher-ups cannot handle this anymore. You're going to be eventually asked to leave. And I don't want to give away the ending.
Okay, sure, yeah, right.
And so, well, you have to read it.
I can see how a lot of people then could identify with that, because there's a lot of people who are questioning certain things, and they're not sure how far their questioning is going to go, or what sort of mischief this is going to create, or what sort of problems, particularly for people who have been part of an organization that's been also community. I mean, when you've spent time caring about, loving, and being involved in a community, the people that you're connected with, just because some questions come up as to just what you're thinking or believing, does this mean you lose all your friends? Does this mean you lose your network of support? Does this mean you have to start over with all of that? And these are big questions that a lot of people can relate to, because although in fact, in the previous show, we were talking about how the nuns, that is, the people who have no church affiliation, and the duns, the people who used to have one, they're just not going anymore, even though their beliefs haven't changed. There's a lot of people today still in churches and still very much part of organizations, and they're hesitant and not sure what to do. And I can imagine that a book like this could inspire them in some way, even without regard to what decision they end up making.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but should I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Recount my personal experience with that. After these questions came up in my mind, I wrote a paper, sort of an academic theological approach, and I gave it to the church. Within 3 days, I was called before, I label it a tribunal. Mm-hmm. And there were people in the church that I could tell were very, very standoffish at them. They were scared. I was subtly removed from all positions of leadership in the church, and eventually, approximately another year later, with just continued requests that I keep my mouth shut, I just decided that I would leave on my own. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I wanted to stay. I could maintain my paradigm within that context. It was very difficult at times, but I wanted that fellowship. But eventually it just got to the point where I had to remove myself.
Yeah.
And
I can identify
I'm
with that.
okay. I'm okay with that.
I can identify with that. I left church myself. I former pastor. Wasn't a pastor at the time when I left. I had stopped doing that for a while. But I got to the point where I remained a part of a community that I liked being part of, even though, and I felt like, as you were saying, that I could maintain my own way of thinking and even accept the fact that other people were thinking in a way that was perhaps far more traditional. But it finally did get to the point where a couple of things. One is I got tired of working with it, but also I felt like sometimes I was causing consternation and difficulty, and I didn't need to be doing that, and
Yes.
wasn't helping. And so, plus I wasn't getting anything out of it necessarily.
Yes.
There's a sense in my own sense of the otherness of God and being loved and accepted. I had no problems with this, and so there's a sense in which I didn't really need this, and so I just stopped going. And
Yes.
never really missed it much. On occasion, I missed some of the community aspects, but didn't miss the other. I'm curious, Daryl, have you been following any of this conversation? Any thoughts?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say I got to see the show this morning, and I enjoyed it very much. I'm a little confused as concerning the name. I noticed is it James or is it Pep? I mean, how do I refer?
Most everyone calls me Pep. My legal name is James.
Well, if it's okay, I'll call you Pep then.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I really enjoyed the things you had to say this morning, and I must say it's always refreshing to hear someone with a very similar experience and similar point of view. And I did want to add to what each of you have said about when it comes to the church. I was actually disfellowshipped from the group I was involved in. It's been many years ago now, but it was one of these situations where the leadership got out of hand. It's kind of a thought control situation, and so I wasn't going along with everything, and so I became a problem, and it was a strange situation. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it was a kind of a communal type situation. We all lived together on a piece of property that belonged to the one who was in charge. And this was something that had never come up before, to disfellowship someone within, that had lived there, And so it started out kind of like what you were talking about, only a little more involved, because for me to not be a factor there, I would have to leave. I would have to move somewhere else. But over a short period of time, I realized that this just wasn't going to work. My children were kind of ostracized, and so it was a very uncomfortable situation for everyone. So I decided to leave. And but my experience after that, it took quite some time to come into the kind of thinking that I have now, to where it's and I fully agree about the inclusiveness. When I talk about race, I'm talking about the human race. I don't know any other race, And I see us all as God's children, and have discovered many wonderful things along the way, and am enjoying the journey. But I've experienced a lot of the things that each of you have been speaking of, as far as, people just don't seem to know what quite to do with you at times.
I have Dr. Jones here on the phone, who unfortunately is not going to be able to join us for very long, but Dr. Jones wanted to mention a couple of things. So go ahead, Dr. Jones.
I'm really enjoying the show tonight. I wish that things would have worked out to where we could have had it that is being broadcast through Pensacola. We do have an area-wide blackout that is of our internet connection, and so we have guys from the cable company trying to get that fixed right now. With that said, we had Pep this morning on Sunday morning at the place, and I have to say that this gentleman is awesome in so many different ways. In that he really wants to take the intellectual journey that is in the context of theism, and yet at the same time he wants to look at the poetic side that is of the journey, and that is wonderful. And the things that he's articulating concerning the heart, I think that if people will just think about the potentials there, I think that's going to be the kind of conversation that so many people need to be having. And I just wanted to jump into the conversation just for a moment and just say this is one of those wow moments where you're really proud that people like Pep are writing the kind of books that he's writing, putting on the table some things that will resonate with many theists and atheists alike, simply because of what is inspirational and what isn't. And so I just wanted to make just a couple of statements, and I'm so thankful that you guys were able to do the show tonight. And Bob, you're doing an awesome job. Your show earlier, it's wonderful.
Well, thank you. And we're enjoying a good time here with Pep. I wish I'd had more time to actually have read through parts of his book. I got a chance to kind of browse through a few things. I didn't get actually access to it until later this afternoon. So, but from what I've seen here,
to be honest with you, Bob, this morning we had pulled Pepin to our show this morning, and it was a last-minute thing simply because we had someone cancel out on us, and Pep's such a wonderful person, but I had not read the book. But my wife was reading the book, and I said, honey, I've read a little bit of it, and I really enjoy his writing style, by the way. I mean, he is a wonderful author. But I was looking at my wife, and I said, you're crying. She said, this is amazing. and so when my wife starts crying during the middle of reading a book, and it starts touching her, because my wife is very much a person who operates from the heart. I mean, so many times she corrects me, not because she has this particular logical point that she wants to make, but it's more of something from the heart that makes sense in that particular axis, and it's so enriching. And so I can't say enough about that, because it has really enhanced our lives. That is what that means in bringing something in a relationship context for both my wife and me. And so I think this conversation is so good. And Pep, if you can hear me, once again, I do like the bass on the wall behind you. That's nothing but a plus point with us down here in the South.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks, Dr. Jones. We'll let you go, and thanks for giving us a few words there. And I'll tell you what, Rhonda, she reads stuff.
Let me tell you something. I can't brag enough about my wife. That's why I keep saying my wife is God. Hey, thanks, Bob. We love you guys. Take care.
Yeah, one thing I've learned. Go ahead.
Bob, we were talking about experiences through life as we walk through life, and I believe it's Daryl who was recounting, his experience in a church and then finally leaving as well. And when we're in those situations, it's not comfortable, and we wonder just, what the heck is going on? I mean, life. I got enough problems in my life that I can't figure out, and why do I need more? And I'm wondering, I'd like to just read a section of the book that deals with our life path, and that many times when we're in the midst of the mess, it makes no sense to us. So could I have permission to probably take
go
about
for it. Go for it. Yeah.
3 minutes?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Okay, this is a dream that's being recounted by the old man. I had a Bawazikawewen, that's a dream, this last week that I am to tell you. In dream, I was walking in a large gitagan, that's a garden, and that I had seen a long time ago in the south. The dream garden was full of many different flowers and bushes and vegetables, but it was not orderly like the one I had seen in Fort Garry. Fort Garry is now called Winnipeg. Similarly, plants were in bunches like they had been planted together, but everything seemed to have no order. The paths were hard to follow, and I was having to struggle my way through all the different plants. I was picking berries and digging up ogigugun, which is roots in the Anishinaabe language, and taking a handful of certain leaves to eat. Sometimes I would pick a flower and eat it too. Most of what I eat would be hard to swallow. But once it was down, it seemed good in my stomach, and I thanked the plant. Some things I ate were to my liking right away. I found that I was in the middle of the gitagan, the garden, and confused about why was this gitagan so jumbled and chaotic. It seemed that the keeper of the gitagan didn't have a plan. All of a sudden, the things I had eaten began to cause me to grow feathers, and like an owl, and I became like an owl, and I flew high up into the air. I circled higher until I could see the whole gitagan. When I got high enough, the meaningless chaos that it all seemed to be when I was in the middle of it started to have a purpose. I could tell that some bushes had to be planted where they were to give nearby flowers shade from the afternoon sun. And some plants were in a place for birds so that they could guard a vegetable from insects. Everything was being worked for the good purpose by the keeper. When I was looking down through my owl eyes, it all made sense and had a great pattern. I could see the keeper of the garden working in one of the areas to make everything purposeful. He was shaping and digging and planting things. And there was a small wind blowing through the window when I came back from this dream. And the wind seemed to bring these words to me. Soon you will rise up and fly away to the one who has loved you even before your beginning. Your gitagan, your garden, is almost filled, and the keeper has been taking and planting and shaping the happenings of your life for good, beyond your understanding. When you fly to the Eternal One, then you will know just as you are known, and you will see clearly, and there will be no questions. The love, joy, and peace that you have only tasted a little of will then fill you up. So to me, that I read that because it is speaking to some of the chaos in the gardens of our lives.
Very
Yeah,
good.
and showing how the bird's eye view is different from the being in the midst of it, and
Yes. Yeah.
the chaos from within the midst, and yet the sense of order. Yeah, I yeah, I like that. And it kind of invites you to hey, let's look at this differently and step outside of our own little perspective here and see things.
That reminds me, if I might say something, this is a statement and then a question for you, Pep. When I look back at some of my old views, I will admit, I was locked into an attempt. I didn't think of it this way at the time, but I was locked into an attempt to look at the Bible as my authority. As I've got to take my viewpoints from the biblical view. And so I can't say it satisfied me, but this is in reference to what you were talking about earlier about the heart. I can't say that I was satisfied with this, but it was, I guess, sufficient for me when I would think about, say, in India or Africa or one of these other nations where children are starving to death on a daily basis, and things like this. And in my mind, or I should say in my heart, that doesn't seem right. But then I could look into the Old Testament and see what happened to nations and to peoples when they didn't recognize the one true God, and how that these people were forsaken, they were experienced all these horrible things. And then if you take into account that supposedly there's this eternal place of torture that they're going to end up in anyway, then I could somewhat from my mind dismiss any further thought concerning these people. But it made me think of that when you read this story, because now I can see them more from a better view. I can see them with compassion. I can realize this is my brothers and my sisters. I have no right to dismiss them. I need to be about understanding what can be done for them, so that they can enjoy the quality of life I do. It's a whole different perspective.
Well, one of the things that occurs to me is, as Pep was reading that section there, was that unfortunately in our culture, we face too much and emphasize, I think, too much the fact that we're in the midst of a life whereby we have to find a means of surviving, we have to have a career, we have to have ways of paying the bills, and we end up really having a relationship with our economic needs, and with our network of people who are our neighbors and our community. Whereas what he's talking about here is something where I'm actually in the midst of a life, in the midst of an environment, and it's an environment that I need to in some ways pay attention to, connect with, relate, find meaning in, and even recognizing the chaos that might appear to be part of these other parts of the mundane world that actually seduce me almost to just focus on all of these other issues that are not really, I got to tell you, all that important. Yeah. And now you were a librarian for a number of years, right, Pep?
Yes, I was a teacher for 33 years, librarian and teacher. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I retired early. I kind of figured, well, I can always get more money, but I can't get more time. So I've been retired for 10 years now.
Good thinking.
Yeah. Now, I've always loved books, and there's something about what books are. I have no idea if this is part of why you were a librarian, or that's just the doors that open up for you. But I used to love hanging out at the library, even when I was in high school. And when I was in college first time, I actually got a job in the local library, working in the stacks and, and stuff like that. And I just loved it. It's something about books. And, I have nowhere near the number of books I used to have. I've thinned them out. But I've got about...
Yes.
I used to have about like 200 linear feet of bookshelves filled with books, and most of them that I'd really, if I hadn't read, I'd been through them quite thoroughly. And
well, you can see some books behind me, but I keep a lot of books behind me to impress people.
Yeah. Well, I collect books on anything and almost everything, And in fact, I'm a college professor, but I do tell my students every semester, the first lecture of the year is I explain to my students that I'm a fraud, and the reason that I'm a fraud is because although I've been to college to study accounting and computer science and human development and also linguistics, I teach the science of sound engineering, and I've never taken a class on it in my life. but I've been running a recording studio, and it's books. It's this love of learning that actually brought me to a place where they came to me and asked me to teach this stuff because they knew that I could do this rather than me actually pursuing this as a career. And it all came from really just the love of learning and the love of books.
Mhm.
And so you of course you wrote a book, so could you tell me something about your relationship with books?
Well, I'd like to just comment on a love of learning. Our journey in life, let me jump back a little. Much of the current conservative religious world seems to operate under the paradigm that now you have the truth, there's no need to look further. Once we get a certain mental matrix that is supposed to make God now happy with us because we have agreed with him on certain contexts according to authority, that now there's no need to go forward, so to speak. And yet that never fit with me. If I'm always learning, I'm going to change. And so my religious views, as I had said earlier, began to change. And I think that God has placed us here to experience as much of life, as many different avenues, if you will, as we can to pursue that. And I don't think that when we stand before him in the standard evangelical paradigm that you want to make sure you're doing everything God wants you to do so that he will say to you, well done, good and faithful servant. Well, I think what he's really going to say is, well done, good and faithful servant. You went out and explored as many avenues as you could, experienced as many ideas as you could so that you could seek out truth. You used the freedom that I gave you to the extent that you were capable of. Well done. And instead of being restricted by the exclusivity of so much of conservative Christianity, this inclusive view now that I have has freed me. I can explore.
I find it even even in a sense where people who I disagree with, I find that I still have a great deal in common with them because
Yes.
they're coming to conclusions that based on their standpoint in life, these are the conclusions that make sense to them, and that's the same thing I'm doing, and I'm looking for that commonality of the dynamic of learning, or the dynamic of testing out or settling into a perspective and trying to deal with it. And one of the things I think I've discovered, even in my own paradigm shifts, is that you can't change your mind just because, well, I must be wrong. You really have to kind of explore some ideas, try them out, let them fall apart naturally, if they will, if they don't, and
Yeah.
then you move on to other areas, and that there's really there's not this sense of urgency about it all that some people may want to place upon you, but rather we can do this a step at a time, and if tomorrow we decide that we're going to junk some ideas, or we're going to head out in a totally new direction, wonderful, let's just do that. and
Sure.
and it's a comfortable thing, and it's never destroyed my sense of faith, and in terms of that I have this sense of otherness, that I believe in God. But I got to be honest with you that as time has gone on, I have no idea what I mean by God, and
Yes, I know.
it isn't. It's like a sense of presence, and I have to admit it. I could even be wrong about it, or it's even possible that my sense of God is really some other spiritual being, and then there is no God, and that this is a being that can barely communicate with us, and that's why we have such a vague sense of, I don't know. I don't really worry about it. I don't really care. But there's a sense in which we're on this little marble together, and uh, there's no future in the us versus them mentality, and
Yes.
in the tribalistic investment of that sort. I'm a member of the human race,
Yes. Yes.
and I have no idea where we're going. I'm not even sure where we've been, but
Mhm.
at the same time, one of the things that amazes me is how it is that human beings seem to thrive when they are regarded as truly valuable as an existence, and
Mhm.
they suffer when they're treated as if they're second rate, or lack
Yeah.
value in even existing. And so
Mhm.
um, consequently, the inclusiveness strikes me as far more important than whether or not I've got my bills paid, and I've got my career set, and I'm settled, and I'm in a house, and I got my cars, and I got this and that, and what are you doing, and why not, and do I have to pay taxes to support you? And I just yeah, not to say that some of these issues don't have value or are important, or that people don't need to
Sure.
learn how to somehow grow up and take a certain level of, but it doesn't happen by shaming them or pushing them, or dividing lines and stuff like that.
Right.
It is more a different. I had a student in my, in a conference with him just this last week who, he's struggling. He's not doing well, and while I'm talking to him, he would constantly look down, and and, I said, look up, look at me. You're a human being. Don't ever apologize for being human. Don't do that. It's just not.
No, that's good.
It doesn't become your dignity as a human being. And I said, so you're
Yes.
struggling. You're not sure what you're doing. You may feel a little bit ashamed, but that's okay. We're going to work with this as best we can, and if we can't, we won't. And plus he had a sister who was going through a lot of problems, and I suggested, maybe this isn't the time for school for you because of these other issues. I don't know, but don't ever apologize for existing or being you.
Mhm.
But
Bob, a little earlier, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
go ahead.
Bill. A little earlier, you were talking about how the sense of freedom that you have, that has been birthed out of, seeing yourself as a citizen of the world, as a brother to all the rest of our human family. And I love that holy carelessness, that um, knowing that we are embraced by God no matter our belief system, no matter our behaviors, knowing that we are embraced by Him in spite of that, does produce that holy carelessness that frees us so that we can walk and really experience life. Why He gave us existence.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right. Now, are
I
you
like
married?
that.
Do you have children at all, or?
I do. I have a 38-year-old daughter who gave us our first grandchild a month ago,
Oh,
and I have a son who is 31. His name is Jamesy, and he is adopted Inuit from northern Canada.
yeah.
And his name, Kuviagi Yauyok, means source of joy.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The reason I asked that is because, as you probably have already figured out, although your children may have had some learning they needed to go through, some developmental processes that you as dad were in some ways responsible for, encouraging and drawing out of them. There was never a time, I'm sure, where your children became at risk of no longer being loved by you because they were, like, making mistakes or not. you know
Absolutely.
and in fact, it's not to say that mistakes aren't significant or can't be problematic, but they're totally irrelevant to whether or not we have a
Yes.
relationship going on. And in the same
Yes.
way is, that's how I feel about, the human race, the human family. Yeah, we got some serious problems, some of them very serious, and we have some very unworkable behaviors and attitudes and ideas,
Yes.
and I'm
Yes.
not so sure that mine are always the best either. But at the same time, this is kind of irrelevant to the fact that we are precious human beings together.
Yes.
And that were going through this. What caused you to decide to write this book? When did you decide that you were going to write it?
Actually, it took me 3 years to write it. I started it probably 6 years ago or so. One of the things that has been that I have been very aware of in my life, growing up in the home of, my father was a conservation warden, so I've been very intimately connected to the environment. And our creation is known, of course, as the general revelation. It is God's first way of communicating his nature to reality and to us. And so the reading of God's nature in the creation is with every generation being lost more and more. And the book is filled with examples of how the rocks of the earth, or the deer and the behavior of animals, speak to us of the nature of God. And so that was one of the catalysts that was involved in me choosing the motif for this book. It's filled with this grandfather's earthy experiences in hearing spirit speak to him within through the creation.
So your dad, being a conservationist, put a lot of context into this for you then.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. He's passed on, of course, but he had more than he realized. He was a hard father. More than once, I got his back of his hand alongside my head. But I always knew that he loved me. So, could I possibly read an example of how nature, how the creation, this first revelation of God to us, speaks to us?
Sure, go for that. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. This is the old man writing again, and he says, "The people of the world are like the stones on the lake shore near your cabin. Everyone has been made different and is a gift to the world. Each has been given special qualities by the action of the Creator. Each is different and has a unique place on the shore of his world. Yet, each is equal. Let me tell you how this equality is true. I will show you something about every stone on our shoreline. Every stone has the same source. They have all come from the one great rock. This rock is the foundation of the earth itself. It comes from the deep, unseen place in the earth. No stone on our shore can exist without this rock. It rises up from the earth and makes every one of the stones as it gives itself away. In this way, all the stones are unique, but all are of one. So it is with the people of the earth. We are all from one source, but unique. We are different shapes, color, like the stones. We reflect the sun differently. We have a different outlook on the world. Some people, like stones, seem hard, some rough or smooth, and some break easy. Yet all have come from the one source. Each shows us of the one rock, because they are all brothers and sisters from the one rock." And that's just an example of the many revelations that come to us from God's creation about his nature.
Mm-hmm. You know, in some ways, it reminds me of a little bit of Buddhist thought, except it's more personally relational instead of a lot of Buddhist thought perceives the structure of reality as being spiritual, but in the sense also impersonal. And whereas this is a far more personal connection with these messages that are coming. Whereas but I see something similar in that. Although I'll tell you, one of the things that always bothered me about Buddhism when I thought about it is that although in many, not in all of it, but in some of it is attempting to disengage from attachment so as to end suffering. And I'm thinking, well, not that I'm going to volunteer for suffering. What's wrong with suffering, and what's wrong with this attachment? And if we're having problems with attachment, then maybe we could just grow up and learn how to manage attachment better. Which is the way it sounded like the way of it. It sounded like a spiritual journey of avoidance in a sense, but so I mean, that's very different here because you're talking about actually engaging, either as the owl or in this way, And
one of the things that I have learned over the last 12, 14 years, when I removed myself from churchianity, I had, of course, still a need for spiritual communion, and I was invited by a friend of mine to join in sweat lodges for my Native American friends and First Nation. And within that understanding, there is the agreement that in life we will have suffering. Embrace that suffering, because in it there's teachings to be learned. Everything that we see and go through in life, there's teachings to be learned. Much of the Pentecostal movement, especially the Word of Life, Word of Faith branch, seems to indicate that any suffering is just to be avoided, to be rebuked, and to run away from. And yet, as I believe his name is Hicks, a famous philosopher still living, he said, God's in the business of soul making. Well, I'm not saying that God is necessarily orchestrating every little event in our lives here. I'm not saying that. But whatever experience comes into us shapes our soul. And when we pass beyond this life, to me, we're going to look back and there'll be no questions as to why did I have to go through that. We're going to embrace that and say, that made me what I am. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I used to, there was a time when I used to believe that God orchestrates things in our lives, and finally it did occur to me that what, I don't need to learn anything that isn't likely to come into my life just by coming into my life the way things naturally work. So why do I need to learn other things? Plus there are many other things. But it seemed to me that like the rider of a horse doesn't control everything about the horse, but with just the bridle and the way the rider sits controls the events is sufficiently enough that the horse is, and in some ways I feel like there's a sense in which it doesn't matter what happens in life. There's something to be learned from the circumstances that just happen. Now, that's easy to say when I'm an American. Yes. And I live in a very, very fortunate country where even the things I complain about are far better than the situations a lot of people elsewhere in the world may be struggling with. So I'm fortunate enough to be living at enough ease that I can actually sit back and whatever rolls my way, I can learn from it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who do live in a circumstance, and this is sad. People live in circumstances where what they're going to learn from it is that there's nothing they can do about it. And and that to me is very sad. I hope that those of us who enjoy the privileges and advantages that we have would feel some sort of obligation to sort of see if we can extend this and further it rather than try to maintain and sustain the edge above and around other people, because I believe that there's enough to go around for everybody,
Oh yes, there is
more than enough, and it concerns me. Of course, it alters my my political views about some things too, and in fact, I've been telling Dr. Jones that I've been kind of sad lately because Noam Chomsky's getting older, and I love that guy.
Yes.
When he talks and says things, he really resonates with me, and he's extremely well read, and really speaks in a very honest way to certain things, and he's so gentle in the way he does it. It amazes me. So sometimes I'll listen to him and I'll try to see if I can kind of come up with his his way of talking. But
yeah, yeah.
we're gonna miss him if he because he's been such a strong voice. And of course, I have a background in linguistics, and so it was his courageous criticism of Skinner's verbal behavior that actually brought him to the forefront, because it was an amazing rebuttal of the argument offered by B.F. Skinner, that trying to talk about language as a conditioned behavior, and so Noam Chomsky was quite a genius just dealing with that.
Oh yes, he is.
So who would you, go ahead.
I was wondering, may I?
Yeah, you broke up there, so I couldn't hear what you asked.
I would like to just read another section.
We'd love to hear it. Sure, yeah. Okay. There's big examples of things that people, then they hear this, they'll say, I wonder what else is in there. Yeah.
We're talking about struggling in life, and accepting or rejecting certain conditions in our life. So this is a short story. Let me see if I can find this. Okay, the old man here is writing about a son of his named Pembina. Pembina is a Anishinaabe for berry. And this is an incident that happened in his life. He was floating down the river near the mouth where it enters Reindeer Lake. It was spring with lots of water flowing, and he was busy looking over the side and pulling his net. He didn't know there was a log from a tree in the water, and when his jiman, which is a boat, hit it, he turned over. He could not swim good and was fighting the fast water, but he was going under. He thought he was going to drown, and very sad that he would be leaving his mother and I all alone, with no children left. And as this sadness crossed his mind, it stopped him from fighting in the water, and he became calm. And when he did this, he floated to the top. When he struggled, he would sink. When he gave up and was calm, he would float again. As he was floating downriver and getting colder, his boat came near him, and he grabbed it and was saved. He got to shore, and he cried. He told us that in his heart he was hearing Gitchi Manadu, Great Spirit, speak to him about this happening. He sensed Father tell him that by being quiet in the water, he was trusting it, and so it would buoy him up. All his fighting and resisting would not help. Pembina said that he learned this, and he learned this was like Father's love. When we are trying to take control and force our way in life, we can drown. When we become quiet, the love and care of our Father is given a chance to buoy us up. The very thing that we think we must resist is often the thing in which the arms of Creator are reaching out and helping us. This is a thing for each person to learn.
It reminds me also of the wisdom of Aikido. Are you familiar at all with Aikido?
The word is familiar, but no, I don't know.
It was a Korean martial art, but it was a very gentle one, and it was almost like a pacifist way of fighting, where the real Aikido master is somebody who would uh, when attacked, find a way of taking the energy and inertia of the person attacking and kind of folding it in on itself, and then kind of bring them down to the ground without harming them, but kind of like saying, I'm not going to push against you. I'm going to rather go in the direction you're going and use that and just kind of redirect it, go with the flow. And if you've ever, and I've had an opportunity to actually be in a ring with an Aikido practitioner, and it is strange. You can't do anything with them if they're really good at it. You try to grab them and hold on, and the next thing you know, you're on the ground. You don't even know how you got there, and it was done with so much ease. And there's a sense in which that's even what judo used to mean. The gentle way is what it was called, and the idea was that behind it was going with don't fight what's going on, rather take what's going on and see if you can find the wave in it and ride it.
Oh yeah, yes.
And to me that there's something in that was a life lesson, similar to that. Don't struggling with the water here, but rather find out what is the water doing and how can I kind of take advantage of what it's doing to save my life,
Mm-hmm.
and working with that. And it also reminds me, I had a great chess teacher, and the things that he would teach me would also things that taught me things about life. For example, he'd say, never retreat. You got a piece in danger. Find a way of moving to the side or fend, inconveniencing the attack without ever losing place. And I found that when the problems of life came along, I didn't want to run away from them. I just wanted to find a way of rearranging the settings if I could, where it altered the balance of things in a way that could produce better outcomes. But kind of reminded me of that in hearing that. Well, we've gone here for an hour here, and I think what I'm going to do is pull this show, and unfortunately we couldn't be joined by Dr. Jones. I don't want to give out too much information, but he's up against quite a bit. They've had some outages down there, which is unfortunately inconvenient, but which is why he also talked to us by phone. But also, as I understand, that there's a family member who's quite ill right now, and they're deeply concerned, and so he's really kind of preoccupied with that, necessarily so. So there've been some concerns there. But Pep, I want to thank you for joining with us. The book is again the title of it was the spiritual. What? Give that to me again. I had it here.
The title is Touching Spirit, the Letters of Menomonie Kay.
Yeah. And this, of course, is available at Barnes & Noble. It's also available at Amazon.com. And it just sounds like a delightful read. This is the sort of book, I imagine, you can read just a little bit of it, kind of put it down, come back to it later, and move along. It's not as if you have to. Because in a sense, this is part of the story, that the person that's what he's doing. He's kind of coming back to these writings. And
it was written to be consumed just like that. Bite off a little chunk, and then ponder, come back here. So.
Well, awesome. Well, and it's a very gentle read, too. Well, thanks for joining us. Daryl, do you have any final comments?
Well, just that it's great to meet Pep, get to know you a little bit. I'm very interested in where you're going with things, and hope to get a copy of your book, because it sounds like something I'd enjoy reading. I've enjoyed what you've read of it.
You can also, are we still on?
Sure, yep.
Yeah. You can also go, I think I mentioned this, to my website, theteacherwithin.com. Mm-hmm. And I can ship a book as well, and pen a note in it.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah, very good. Theteacherwithin.com. The title of the website also communicates a very real idea, notion of what's going on. Hard to realize that for good or for bad, or for better or for worse, that we all come into this life having only what we are with which to make a difference, and consequently that if we don't find it within, how are we going to find it ever? You know, and sometimes we can waste a lot of time getting around to that, and also we can make things harder for other people by not allowing them to have the opportunity to find what it means for them to reach the potential of who and what they are. So anyway, thanks so much for being with us, and this has been this show started out being The Unconventional Pastor, and then it morphed into, because Dr. Jones couldn't be with us, it morphed into something we call The Place, and we call it The Place for biblical, intellectual, and spiritual honesty. And that's not because we claim to be stalwarts of that. We're struggling to even understand what that means, and I thank you for sharing with us, Pep, your own journey here, and I'm looking forward to reading this myself, and the kind of thing that probably, you know, relaxing in the evening, sometimes I need just a breather. You know, just read this through. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
To our guests for being with us tonight too. And we will be back on Wednesday with The Unconventional Pastor at 7 Central, and we'll be back with The Cult of Honesty at 8 o'clock Central, and we'll catch you then. Thanks so much.